this fashion show. Over the course of the next hour, we aim to entertain and inform with a display of military and civilian clothing, the like of which you would have seen on the streets of Bristol during World War II and the post-war period. From snoods to sweep, from utility to uniform, relax, sit back, and let us take you back to a time when beetroot became a fashion accessory. Gravy browning wasn't just for Sunday dinner, and all the best girls loved a singer. The Second World War began on the 3rd of September 1939, and almost immediately the streets were filled with an array of uniforms, both male and female, representing the services of the Royal Navy, the Army, and the Royal Air Force. The basic pattern of all service and auxiliary service uniforms came into being during the mid-1930s, but when war broke out, many were forced to wear uniforms from the First World War. Our first model, Ed, wears a typical uniform of a naval rating: black serge bell-bottom trousers, over jacket with black serge with square fold over collar at the back, and deep V-necked shaped lapels at the front. Underneath, Ed wears a white cotton square neck tunic with detachable navy and white collar, and a white hat with black ribbon. Our Red, Sarah, also wears uniform of a serge, black skirt, fitted jacket with a white shirt and black tie, black stockings and shoes. The badges signify her position as a signals operator. The Wrens were formed at the start of the war, and although they did not go to sea, they played a major part in planning and assisting with operations. By 1944, there were over 74,000 Wrens in the Navy. The Royal Navy played both an offensive and defensive role during the war, taking part in decisive sea battles such as the Atlantic, protecting the merchant ship convoys of the Merchant Navy. Our last model, Phil, is shown wearing the uniform of a Merchant Navy officer, similar to the Royal Navy uniform. The Merchant Navy is distinguished by the use of castle and anchor on its crest, as opposed to the crown and anchor used by the Royal Navy. The Merchant Navy played a vital role in shipping food and fuel supplies across the Atlantic to supplement Russian food on the home front. Thank you. Millions of uniforms had to be produced for the increasing numbers of service personnel. Many factories and manufacturers of civilian clothing found their wool and silk stocks and even their machinery requisitioned for the war effort and the production of uniforms, parachutes, gunpowder, bags and maps. By 1940, there were 1,000 khaki manufacturers in Britain compared to only 9 before the war began. Model Johanna wears the khaki ATS service dress, complete with pink hat, khaki shirt, and tie and flat brown shoes. The ATS, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, was formed in 1938, and more than 250,000 women from across the Empire served in its ranks during World War II. ATS members served in most of the overseas areas of the war and became drivers, orderlies, storewomen, administrators, and cooks, as well as perhaps their most famous role in the anti-aircraft command, operating the Acker guns. Now Tim wears a battle dress uniform with what is known as the Tiddly Jacket. This jacket is highly unusual in that it can be worn in 2 ways. Only officer class were permitted to wear ties with their uniform, and regular soldiers having to do up their jackets with a hook and eye fastening at the neck. The jacket on show here still retains the hook and eye fastening, but the owner of this 1944 jacket has had it illegally modified, so that the lapels can be turned back, allowing him to wear a shirt and tie underneath when not on duty. Women also had battle dress. This was worn with either a skirt or with trousers. For some women, this was the first time they had been allowed to wear such an item. Thank you. The last of our service uniforms are those of the RAF, the youngest of the three services. The RAF was formed on the 1st of April 1918, when the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service amalgamated. The WAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, was mobilized on August 1939. Women joining the ATS were initially invited to join in the army of the RAF. By the June of 1939, those opting for the RAF were transferred into the newly formed WAFs. Both uniforms are made from barathia, and Sue models a flight officer's service dress uniform and wears a blue shirt, grey stockings, and black shoes. Paul also wears service dress, but has swapped his customary black tie for a more informal cravat, and wears flying helmet and goggles rather than a peaked cap. Paul also sports a blue tank top and carries grey socks. All over the country, people were encouraged to form knitting circles to knit various garments for the services. Wool manufacturers even produced knitting pattern books, such as "Wood is for the RAF," for just such a purpose. Warm clothing was as much appreciated by the RAF as pilots. Navigators' crew often had to endure freezing temperatures while flying. Paul also carries the customary leather flying jacket, still a much sought after piece of equipment. Thank you. It wasn't just the people in the services who wore a uniform. Models Sam and Joe demonstrate the style of uniform common to the civil defense. These were the people on the home front line of air raid protection, or civil defense as it later became known. Civil defense included the air raid warriors, ambulance drivers, fire watchers, messengers, and rescue and gas squads. Uniform was important so that the public knew who was who in times of chaos and uncertainty. For some, the uniform of skirts, the uniform was merely an overall and an armband, but for others, it was heavy woolen trousers or skirts teamed with short blouson-style jackets, white shirts, black tie, and black shoes. Women wore black stockings. Note Sam's beret, which became popular as a form of civilian women's headwear during World War II. Thank you. Another service to have a uniform was the Women's Land Army. The WLA was reformed on the 1st of July 1939 to replace a shortage of male agricultural labour. It had a highly distinctive uniform, which had to be worn by its members, unlike the uniforms of the armed services. For outdoor work, many female workers chose to wear dungarees, which even became incorporated into high fashion when the French designer Piquet incorporated them into his 1942 Haute Couture collection. Today, Johanna! Yes, Johanna, well, when she arrives, will be modeling. Johanna, yes. It had to happen. Yes, she models a classic WLA ensemble of tan-core joggers, air-tech shirt, green jumper, beige shorts, and brown shoes. Her hair is covered by a scarf, which was more practical for work than the customary parade hat, which was beige felt and gold rimmed. Covering the hair with the scarf became not only a practical fashion statement, but one which was also a safety device. Thousands of women went to work in the factories of Britain as munitions workers. Now Sarah models a typical munitions worker's overall. Until 1942, these overalls could be bought off the ration. However, many non-factory workers bought overalls to alter into other forms of clothing. Realizing that these items would soon be in short supply, overalls and jumpsuits were placed on ration in 1942. Thank you. Now, America joined the war in 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor. American troops began to be seen on the streets of Bristol from August 1942, and the object for the GIs being here was the preparation for D-Day. General Omar Bradley set up his headquarters at Clifton College and secretly planned Operation Overlord. American troops were billeted all over the city and based in camps at Bedminster, Newell, Shirehampton and Westbury-on-Trym. Segregated black GIs were based at the Muller Orphanage. The Americans built and later donated to the city a hospital at Friendship. Now Stefan here models the GI General Infantryman compact uniform of M1943 jacket with mustards. Around the ankles, he is wearing gaiters. Come along, don't be shy. And has combat boots upon his feet. The famous side cap sits at a jaunty angle on his head. In his hand he carries a copy of the Instructions for American Servicemen in Britain in 1942, which contained a wealth of practical information about life in Britain, including, don't be a show-off. The British are reserved, not unfriendly. And that when you see a girl in khaki or Air Force blue with a bit of ribbon on her tunic, remember, she didn't get it for knitting more socks than anyone else in Ipswich. Accompanying our GI is Sam. She's in a cream embroidered jeans. And Sarwat is in a teal day dress. Sam's dress hints at what was to happen to fashion at the height of the war. Sam's dress is economical, straight, buttoned through with a tie waist and shirt collar. However, the detailing in the decorative punching and embroidery are not typical of what was to come. Sarwat's dress is perhaps archetypal of the 1940s. It is a classic shirt-waister with military silhouette, nipped in the waist, padded shoulders, and economy of materials. The dress has a slightly flared panelled skirt with two front pleats. The bodice is gently gathered at the waistband so to enable that nipped-in look and darted on the shoulders. The buttons on the front of the dress are for show. There are no buttonholes, just press studs, and again, just for economy. Many British girls fell for the chair arm of the GIs. They were better paid than their British counterparts and always seemed to have a steady supply of items that were in short supply over here. Thank you. As the war progressed, fabric became increasingly difficult to buy, and the means to manufacture civilian clothing became more and more difficult. The Board of Trade began to control supplies of fabric to manufacturers to ensure the best use of clothing resources. The Cotton, Linen and Rayon Act was passed in April 1940, and the Limitation of Supplies Act to reduce retail fabric stocks quickly followed in June of the same year. On the 1st of June 1941, clothes rationing was introduced. 66 coupons were issued to all men, women and children, the equivalent of half the clothing that people normally bought. In the same year, silk was banned for civilian use. In the same year, the utility scheme was introduced by the Board of Trade. Its aim was to ensure that low, medium quality goods were produced to the highest possible standards. The word utility was applied to garments made from utility cloth, and the clothes and other goods such as furniture and household linens were identified by the distinctive double crescent label CC41, meaning Civilian Clothing 1941. As seen displayed here by models And Sam. They will be here shortly, I promise. Lizzie and Sam. Hooray! Manufacturers had to produce 85% utility clothing before they were allowed to make clothing from non-utility cloth. Lizzie wears a multicolored utility repeat pattern day dress with short gathered sleeves, turned up at the edges, a square neck, trim overlay, and softly gathered skirt. The dress has small side and back zips. Some of Britain's foremost artists, such as Henry Moore and Graham Sutherland, were commissioned to design repeat patterns that were small to avoid wastage when cutting the fabric. Lizzie also wears ankle socks, encouraged in the summer months to save on stockings, and a utility cape comprising flared panels of heavy treated cotton with slanted armholes and a small check collar. Sam wears a button-through princess-line bold dress in cotton viscose fabric with a tailored waist, short sleeves, and gently flared skirt. Dresses were glamorized by the addition of accessories that were not rationed, such as hats, brooches, and gloves. Thank you, ladies. By 1942, style regulations had been imposed. These forbade the wasteful cutting, and a list of restraints was set out. Dresses could have no more than 2 pockets, 5 buttons, 6 seams in the skirt, 2 inverted box pleats, or 4 knife pleats, and 4 meters of stitching. London's leading fashion designers were recruited to make a prototype collection, and they worked under the title of the Incorporated Society of London Fashion Designers, and including names such as Tiddly Jacket, Hardy Ames, and Bianca Moss. As this collection of dresses indicates, however, utility didn't mean that everything had to look the same. While all dresses modelled here share similarities in the economical cut of the cloth, the black dress, in particular, modelled by Catherine, displays a prettiness, flattering design, and the use of lace inserts to dress up what would have been a plain black dress. The other 2 dresses demonstrate the use of repeat patterns, again, and plain skirts. There you go. The raspberry dress has 4 buttons, less than the regulation, but the summer dress has 6, suggesting that not all designers and manufacturers stuck to the rules. The shapes of the dresses may be plain, but decorative detail was still important. The raspberry silk dress having small ruffles on the sleeves, and the summer dress having small bows attached to the waist. But the summer dress also displays another classic 1940s feature, the high neck. The London designers established the lines for wartime dress. Narrow and tailored silhouette, pronounced shoulders, nipped in waist, slanting or patch pockets, straight skirts with kick or inverted pleats or gently flared panels. Hemlines reached 18 inches from the ground. Military details were apparent in the use of belts, breast pockets, high cut necks, and small collars. Thank you, ladies. Everything all right so far? Marvelous. It's like we're back there again, isn't it? The utility label was also applied to underwear. And Lizzie, I love this girl. Are you there, Lizzie? Can you hear me, Lizzie? Lizzie wears a utility underskirt made from selenium. Many different fabrics were invented during the war, often the result of military experiments to find hard wearing cloths for uniforms or for other service requirements. The underskirt, while cut on the bias, has an additional panel sewn in to provide additional flair to the garment. While government restrictions made it illegal to squander labour on decoration, the underskirt had embroidered stitching on the top of the neckline and a little net to add a little extra interest. Now, Lizzie is wearing nylon stockings. The nylons were first introduced into Britain by the Americans in 1942. They had been available in the USA to the civilians from 1941. Stockings of any description were expensive and difficult to obtain. Women sought additional ways to colour their legs, including gravy browning and cocoa. A line was then drawn up the back of the leg to simulate the seam. Cosmetic companies such as Max Factor introduced a range of leg colourants or liquid stockings for women to help save their stocking ration. Sam wears Celanese all-in-one cami knickers, which still has a 3 coupon tag attached. The garment once again displays embroidery. Sam's stockings are light, a soft woolen fabric. By 1942, the clothing ration was down to 48 coupons. This was to be further reduced in the last year of the war to 36. This allowance would buy a woman a coat at 14 coupons, a woolen dress at 11 coupons, a skirt, blouse, and jumper for 15 coupons, and a pair of cami knickers for 4 coupons, and 4 pairs of stockings. Understandably, many people knitted garments, although knitting wool was rational. And Becky here models a pair of knitted cami knickers with decorative bodice and leg trim and ribbon tie. Thank you. Another much sought-after fabric is parachute silk. Sarah models a pair of silk French knickers and separate camisole accompanied by a peach floor-length robe. The gentle flair of the robe provides a touch of luxury to what was essentially a plain garment. Women's magazines were full of helpful hints to alter existing garments or dress them up by adding fake collars, bodice plackets and panels. Darning was the other essential skill, and Phil here, resplendent in woolen long johns, displays evidence of much culture. Phil also wears a woolen utility shirt, perfect for those little trips outdoors. Yes, thank you very much. And now we turn to swimming costumes. By the 1940s, swimming costumes were becoming a little more daring. And Sue models a floral, multicoloured, strapless cotton swimsuit with elasticated legs, bone-gathered bodice, and a zipped front. Sue was unlikely to have swum in the seas around Britain, as many of our beaches were covered in barbed wire and filled with mines and places. They were public no-go areas, and some beaches that were closed to the public in World War II have only just been reopened in recent years. Instead, Sue may have enjoyed days at the Public Lido, a popular resort and leisure pursuit of the 1930s. Thank you. The abundance of military uniforms prompted the popularity of suits for women, more than ever before, especially those that borrowed from the military style. Catherine here will be wearing a grey suit with red and white pinstripe. This suit was made in America and therefore has more detailing than those made in Britain in the same period. The suit has a Christmas tree collar with wide lapels. It's double-breasted and has attached front pockets Running from the back over the shoulder and down the front are 2 vents of fabric, which are included purely for decorative purposes. The skirt is straight, front pleat, and small side slits. Another American suit is modelled by Cyborg. This suit is much shorter and has a square oval, with a black box jacket and a straight skirt. The collar is decorated with a band of black satin around the edge, and small black bows on the hem of the jacket. David is wearing a double-breasted pinstripe suit with 2-tone shoes. This style has become synonymous with the spirit. A person who could always get you whatever you needed, but at a price. David's suit is from Savile Row, which suggests that he made quite a good living from the black market. We can only guess that David bought his suit before 1941, as it has terms. Like women's clothing, the design of men's garments also had restrictions placed upon them. Single-breasted suits were the norm. Turn-ups were banned, as were braces. Flaps on pockets were eliminated, and suits were reduced from 3 pieces to 2, as waistcoats became surplus to requirements. Hats were still considered typical attire, and were usually modelled on the Homburg or Trilby style. Shoes for men remained traditional, with the brogue or Oxford as the preferred choice of most. Because of rationing, shoes were precious, and many men only had 1 pair of civilian shoes. Our final suit is this blue pinstripe British suit modelled by Suit. It is far plainer and more economical than its American cousins, but still manages to include an element of detail in the cut-out collar. The jacket is straight cut and double-breasted, and the skirt has 3 pleats at the back and 2 pleats at the front to give it a little swing as you walked along. Thank you. Not all clothing in the Second World War can be described as standard. However, Anne Sarah here is modelling a pair of swing pants. Trousers were still a fairly uncommon garment for the average woman to wear outside of work, and these trousers found their origins in the dance halls of America as the craze for swing music took hold. Their flattery shape, created by a side opening, allowed for ease of music, the movement while dancing. Although not readily for sale in Britain, 1940s dressmaking patterns for trousers, etc. encouraged women to produce homemade garments. The swing pants, teamed with an economy blouse. Again, the only decoration is the small self-tie at the neck, and the collar is an excellent example of careful fabric usage, as it only extends as far as the shoulders and does not reach around the back of the garment. The appeal of the swing style also reached coats, as modelled by Sarah. This grey wool swing coat is particularly stylish with its 3 back pleats and button insert decoration and the heavy shawl collar. American style also reached men's fashion. With fewer restrictions on fabric neck widths, men's trousers were wider and pleated fronts became very popular. It was also common to find men now adopting a far less formal look. After the formality of uniform, many men opted to forego the constraints of collar and tie, and some men's shirts were even deliberately designed to be worn without a tie. Teamed with a knitted jumper or pullover, the outfit was casual but smart. Thank you. The military look also extended to coats. Here we have 2 coats that not only derive their shape from the armed forces garments, but also their colour. Johanna models a blue fitted coat. Once again, it has padded shoulders, coat buttons to the waist to create the classic 1940s silhouette. It has a pleated skirt, front and back, and turned back cuffs. Its shorter length is indicative of the need to save on materials wherever possible, and the coats were no exception. The blue-grey coat modelled by Sarwat shows just how close in style clothes could be. The basic features of padded shoulders, shorter length, and nipped-in waist are all evident in this coat too. Thank you, ladies. At the end of the war, thousands of service personnel were demobilized. Men were offered a full suit of clothes, from underwear and shoes to overcoat and hat. Ed here wears a typical demob suit in brown tweed. It is single-breasted to save on fabric and does not come with a waistcoat, another wartime economy. Ladies' dresses did not change very much in the immediate post-war period. Rationing continued and austerity became the byword. Sue wears a pink patterned day dress. The style is still economical, but this dress does have a full-length zip as opposed to the side zip of the war years. The collar too has lovely detail with the inclusion of black stitched lattice work and small metal studs reminiscent of military pins. Thank you. Catherine here wears a crepe multi-patterned day dress with short sleeves. The bodice had an insert and 4 buttons either side. The skirt is softly pleated and around the waist is a fabric-covered belt. Thank you. Life during World War II was not all areas. People still found time to dress up on occasion, and looking glamorous was one way in which people could boost morale. Early 1940s evening dresses often harked back to the late 1930s and the influence of Hollywood sirens such as Rita Hayworth and Betty Grable. At the beginning of the war, the haute couture market still designed and made glamorous gowns. But these were primarily intended for export to the USA, where important revenue for the war effort in Britain would be raised. As the war progressed, increasingly, evening gowns were remodeled to update. Now Sarah here is modeling a full-length floral chiffon dress with a yellow satin underdress. It is strapless and has a ruched bodice with a shawl scarf attachment. To add a further touch of glamour, elbow-length gloves in a complementary colour were worn along with high-heeled shoes. Sarah is accompanied by Joe, who wears a classic man's single-breasted evening suit, complete with bow tie and waistcoat. Thank you. Models of a later 1940s evening gown in black taffeta and net. The inclusion of net meant that not so much taffeta was needed. The dress is sleeveless, but the straps are decorated to add interest. A black cotton full-length underskirt accompanied the dress, as did a black bustier. The bodice is fitted with a bow, and 3 more bows are attached to the back of the dress. For warmth and further style, Jackie wears a fox fur wrap, a material not in vogue today, but very popular during the 1930s and the 1940s. Jackie is a coat front pockets and back pleats. Susie is wearing a full-length cotton voile evening dress, which has been hand-made, sleeveless, small frill around the neckline, and matching frill around the skirt. This dress is typical of women's ingenuity in the face of shortness. Thank you. Makeup was an important factor too, and looking good was a boost for morale. The chemical and flavour required for producing makeup were needed in munitions manufacture, and consequently it was in short supply. The black market trade in cosmetics flourished, and chemists experimented with homemade substitutes. Women also tried to make their makeup last longer. Lipstick ends were crumbled into an egg cup and stood in a bowl of hot water to melt them down together. Beetroot would also be used to stain the lips, or was mixed with face cream to make rouges. Lipstick would also be mixed with cold cream or almond oil to make rouge. Eyelashes were brushed with castor oil, burnt cork, shoe polish, or even soot when no mascara was available. Tea leaves in muslin bags were used as a face mask, and sugar and water would be used as a setting lotion for the hair. Women would dye their legs with gravy colouring or draw an eyebrow pencil up the back of their legs. Soap was also rationed. People had to choose whether they wanted clean clothes or a clean body. Deodorants were hard to come by, and women were advised to use bicarbonate of soda. And GIs are supposed to have said that British girls smelled. For the ordinary man and woman, fashion was something reserved for high days and holidays. Make do and mend was the name of the game, and preserving one's clothes was a way of life. Housework was a much dirtier affair than today. Without the aid of dust damping polishes and vacuum cleaner, dust was persistent and ever-present. Most women wore a pinafore to protect clothes while undertaking such chores as cleaning out the grate and making up the fire or beating carpets. Sarah wears a classic wraparound pin to protect her clothes and a turban to keep the dirt out of her hair. And Phil here models the classic man-at-home look: trousers, collarless shirt, and waistcoat. For many people, opportunities to dress up were few and far between, but weddings gave everyone an excuse to get dressed up. Thank you. Throughout the war, people made the best of the situation and overcame the shortages with imagination and creativity. Wartime weddings, perhaps, demanded more imagination than most other situations. Here is Sam, wearing a mid-1940s ivory satin unlined wedding dress. No extra clothing coupons were allowed, so girls made dresses from whatever was available: curtains, tablecloths, and salvaged silk parachutes, a particular favourite. This dress has a tucked-in front panel to maintain the typical silhouette look, and although cut on the bias to prevent wastage of fabric and to create additional stretch, a fishtail back has been added, allowing for a hint of a train. Satin-covered buttons to the front, and sleeves add a small amount of decoration, and ruched collar again adds extra interest. A plain net veil complements the dress. 40s brides had to be exceptionally resourceful in planning their weddings. The traditional wedding fruitcake, for instance, was difficult to make due to the shortage of ingredients. People often borrowed a decorated cardboard cover from the baker, which they simply fitted over their own more modest cake, usually a sponge made with dried eggs. Wartime weddings were often small, rushed affairs, due to the fact that the grooms were posted at short notice and many couples were married on special license. The number of wartime weddings reached its peak in 1940 when 533,900 couples were married. Many couples only knew each other for a short time before they were married, but due to the unique wartime atmosphere, they took the risk. For some, it was short-lived happiness. For others, that happiness lasted a lifetime. And although some post-war reunions could be a difficult and strained affair. Our groom is dressed in army military service dress. The wedding dress and uniform are garments worn by a bride and groom at an actual 1940s wedding. They are still together today. While many brides married British servicemen, a great number also married their American sweethearts, GI brides, and often returned home with them to the States at the end of the war. Sue wears a long green crepe wedding dress. The straight skirt is gently flared at the bottom, and an inserted panel in the hem adds an extra kick. It has the classic 1940s padded shoulders and an off-center ruched bodice. The felt floral brooch softens the look of the dress, while the gold-look metal panel belt adds a touch of military style. Stefan wears GI service dress with a chocolate service jacket and trousers. These were known incidentally as pinks. The customary side cap is also worn. Thank you. In post-war years, clothing styles became a little more relaxed. Dior's new look with its full wide skirts was popular for those who could afford it. For the average person, however, things were still a little difficult, though the fabric was not easy to come by. Clothes rationing did not end until 1949, but as you can see from these examples, dresses from the later 1940s and early 1950s began to use more fabric than in previous years, and some borrowed from the new look of Dior and adapted the style. Now Becky is wearing a very elegant black linen dress with a wrap-over bodice and button-through skirt. The longer skirt length and wrap-around design use far more fabric than the conventional button-through stomacher. The dress is collarless, a feature that many dresses of this period have, and has 3/4 length sleeves with a split detail turn-up on the cuff. Thank you. Sarah is wearing a gently flared parallel dress in dog-tooth check. It too has 3/4 length sleeves and turn-back cuffs, and employs a pretty front button placket. Sarah's dress uses a vast amount of fabric in the skirt, but retains an element from the 1940s design in the use of the flattering front panel over the tummy. The dress is softly gathered over the bust and has capped sleeves. Perhaps the most striking thing about this dress is the pattern, which references the interest in space exploration. Catherine's dress falls softly from the bust line into an elegantly, gently flared skirt. Its wide neckline sits on the shoulder, and the dress makes use of 2 layers of fabric, an underlayer of pink satin and an overlayer of mink-covered lace. Our final dress, modelled by Sam, is a delightful little sleeveless summer dress in purple soft cotton fabric. It has a full skirt complete with net underskirt and pretty ribbing detailing on the shoulders and around the base of the skirt. By the mid-1950s, Britain was moving out of austerity and towards a bright new future. Rationing was over. Fabric was available, and people were beginning to spend money on clothes once more. Make-do and men was a thing of the past. Stockings were in, and the here and now, and tights were still in the future. Thank you. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you enjoyed this morning. The organisers of this show would like to thank the following people, without whom it could not have been possible. Will you please welcome back all the glamorous and game models?